Welcome again to today's episode of Hack Your HasCom. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Jennifer Koenig. Jennifer has over 30 years of regulatory compliance experience, and as an environmental health and safety manager, her experience includes a broad variety of duties such as providing compliance audits, designing regulatory programs, and instituting and implementing training programs to meet OSHA, EPA, and DOT regulations. She is the owner of ECS Audit and Compliance Services, LLC, which operates as a compliance resource to small and medium businesses who either do not have a full-time EHS manager or who prefer to outsource certain aspects on their regulatory programs. ECS also provides ISO internal and certification audits. Welcome, Jennifer. So I've invited you today to talk about trends in the auditing world. So let's dive into it.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me on. We were talking recently at the AHMP conference, the EHS Hazmat Summit in Louisville a couple of weeks ago, and talking about different trends in particularly ISO audits, 14,001 for environmental, the 45,001 for health and safety. And a lot of people don't think about these ISO standards as a method of risk management, a method of ensuring that we identify all of our compliance obligations and that we have a robust system to sustain those programs no matter who's sitting in a given seat on the bus. So that is one of the things that we were chatting about. Um, and in particular, yeah, I have a background in environmental and health and safety compliance, but in my role as an ISO auditor, I'm actually not allowed to audit regulatory topics specifically. Meaning that I am not with the EPA, I'm not with OSHA, I'm not with your state flavor of that. I am going into a company as their resource, their company, I guess you'd say an in-house police in a way, so we're looking at what are our obligations, but what is our flavor at our company? Because the EPA and the state regulations are very, very broad, and most of the times they cover many different sectors of manufacturing or service businesses. And so we're required to, in most cases, to create our own plan for how we're going to achieve compliance and still build our widgets or whatever we're doing in the way of a service program. So that can be very challenging to companies. But on the other side, when you create a program, that becomes your compliance obligation. And a lot of companies don't understand that when they're auditing the ISO, that's inside the scope of our audit. So, for instance, if I have a regulatory program for spill prevention, control, and countermeasure, SPCC, right? So, that is a regulatory program, but it's site specific. So, if I'm doing an ISO 14001 audit for, environmental, I'm going to look at that program and I'm going to look to see, are you doing your inspections the way your program says you're going to do it? If you say you're going to do it monthly, every third Friday of the month, then that's what I expect you to do. Now, I'm not going to cite that it's a compliance failure if you don't do it every third Friday of the month. I'm going to say your operational controls aren't effective, right? So I'm going to cite that under 8.1 for operational controls. So I don't normally cite anything to do with the legal compliance aspect itself, with the exception that if companies haven't identified what is applicable to them, then yes, we're going to say you have a gap in knowledge. You don't know what's applicable to you. And,
Okay.
sometimes companies think that their registrar, their certifying bodies operate or auditor is responsible to make sure that they are compliant. And that's actually, we're not allowed to do that. So you're supposed to have a separate audit for compliance. And that's something I'm seeing in companies that um, they're not bellying up to the bar very well with looking at their compliance obligations. And as a consequence, when I go in and do an audit, whether it's an internal audit or a third party audit for the registrar, it turns into a bit of a train wreck because I know more about their programs than they do.
Ooh. Yeah. I can expect you're probably running into potentially hard discussions there, right? And going back to that concept, what you said as far as compliance versus looking at a process, right? So is it that the ISO world looks at they're more interested in if you have a consistent process versus a compliance?
Well, when a company gets certified to an ISO program,
Mm,
the registrar is sharing in risk with you.
mhm,
So, if you've ever worked with a company or if your company has been certified, your contract with your registrar. I don't know that I've ever worked with a registrar that didn't have this in their contract. Will say that if you've had a notice of violation or court ordered consent decree or any alleged environmental infraction, you need to advise your registrar about that. So it's not that your certificate's going to get yanked over that. It's that they will come in at the next visit and they will look to see how you're managing that risk. Are you putting it in your corrective action system? Are you looking at root cause and determining how do we prevent recurrence of that issue? So, it's not that your registrar is going to say, well, you've got an X on your homework assignment here. We're pulling your cert. It's really not the way it works. We look to see, are you managing that risk? And are you just kind of sugarcoating it, giving it a pencil mark, check off, oh, I fixed it. It's done. Well, in ISO world, we don't just fix things. We look at root cause and we go down deeper than just, oh, well, John forgot to do the inspection. Well,
mm,
why did John forget to do the inspection? Well, we start looking at root cause and say, well, John was on medical leave. Oh, well, then John didn't forget. John wasn't there. So so what's really the root cause? Well, we didn't have a backup person. Now we're getting somewhere, right? And so when we say, well, we just caught up on the inspection, I'm going to say, as the auditor, let's go a little deeper here, friend. What did we need to do differently to prevent this happening the next time somebody goes on vacation or has a body part replaced or is out on medical leave?
right. Because in that case, ultimately, going back to what you said earlier, that if I have a regular inspection cadence, right? And that day the inspector or the person that's supposed to do this checklist is not there, what you're saying as an auditor is then who's your backup to make sure that that cadence is continued, right? That the process is the same. Is that correct?
So it's sustainable, right? So, one things I'm running into right now is lots and lots of retirement.
Mm,
I knew it was coming, but COVID, I think, expedited that for many companies. And it also expedited some companies merging, getting bought out by other companies. And people who maybe been with a company for a long time decided, you know what? I don't want to deal with a new set of owners. I'm going to go ahead and retire. Right. And so we've got a number of unplanned or maybe unplanned's not the right word, but maybe not announced a year in advance kind of
mm,
thing like we used to get. Now we might get a month if we're lucky. And so there's a new person coming in and they don't always know where things got left or, did things get done properly? Where did they file things? Where were the records kept? It's not necessarily sustainable.
sure. Okay. And what other problems or potential pitfalls do you encounter when you go about, the potential hard conversations that you have as you come across as the inside police, as you mentioned?
Well, so the way I look at it is my role and responsibility is to identify risk that companies don't always know themselves. Um, and I don't really think of myself as the police per se. I really consider myself more if you think back to Victorian days, the Victorian police in England, they used to go door to door and rattle the doorknobs, and they wanted to see them locked. That was the point, is that they were supposed to be locked. And if they weren't locked, they blew their whistle and got attention and got help and went and investigate, right? That's kind of the way I approach my auditing process. Not all auditors do that, but my approach is I'm here to be a resource to my clients. I'm here to bless them. I'm here to identify risks that they may not even know exist or have sort of known in the background. Oh, well, John is, getting up towards retirement age, but we just thought he'd be here forever, you know? And I'm going, John's making noises like he might be retiring. And have you all thought about who you're gonna put in to mentor with him, so that when he does retire, we're not SOL, you know? Um, in the past, what would happen in most organizations is you had, a deep bench within the department. So you might had 2 or 3 people in an EHS team. That's not the case anymore. You usually are having 1, and if you're lucky, 2. And so you don't necessarily have that hierarchy and upward mobility in a company. You may be hiring a kid straight out of college to come in and run your EHS program, which was unheard of prior to COVID, but it's happening now.
Mhm.
And so some of the tough conversations I'm having isn't really so much about hiring somebody straight out of college with no real world experience, but rather when companies decide to uh, move someone from a non EHS role to an EHS role and just think that they can put a warm body in that seat and how hard could it be? Right.
Right.
And then I have to have a conversation with the plant manager and say, this person has zero experience in EHS. And you're making him a decision maker or her a
Mm.
decision maker. And in some cases, that person has plenty of intelligence. It may be just, okay, you really need to send them for some additional training, and that's one of the things that I love about our Alliance of Hazardous Materials Professionals organization that you and I are both members of, is that we have something called the Essentials of Hazardous Materials Managers management course, EHMM course. And so I've actually recommended to a number of my clients, hey, send your new EHS person to this class. I mean, I get nothing out of it personally. I'm not getting a finder's fee or anything.
Sure.
I just know as one of the individuals that help facilitate this course that it's such a good overview course to identify where your gaps in knowledge are. So anybody coming in new to an organization, they're gonna, if they have some environmental and health and safety background, the chances are not great they're gonna know everything. They're
Sure.
gonna know things that they specialized in over their career. I mean, there's certain things I'm just not particularly good at, so I just don't do them, right? So things like remediation work, well, that's not my area of expertise.
Right.
I do compliance overview more on the manufacturing side, not on the remediation side. So I know where my um, restrictions are, my weak spots are, and I'm just not going to operate in those spaces. I refer my clients to somebody who does that all the
Sure.
time,
Sure.
right? So that's where I do have some tough conversations with plant managers that they may have a problem. with the person they put in a particular role. And, it's not my job to tell them who they can or can't have in a particular role. That's not my place.
Right.
However, I give them feedback on, if you want this person to succeed, you need to give them some additional training. You maybe need to send them to some college courses, some courses like the H&P offers, or even local chapters. So, the H&P group has local chapters across the country, and they often offer various types of continuing education courses that just help to beef up somebody's experience in a given area. Um, but as an auditor, back to your question, um, I'm constantly evaluating what resources a company has, and often it's people resources, knowledge in a given person, where they may need some help or may need to outsource certain things. A lot of companies don't know that they can outsource things like internal audits, for instance. By the very nature of the title, it sounds like it has to be done through our employees. But since COVID, that's been a real challenge. So when you start off with a whole group of new people and you're having to train them to be auditors, it can be a real train wreck. So for
Mm.
one thing, many people in manufacturing don't have the skill set from a question asking and active listening
Mhm.
perspective. And certainly may not have a lot of knowledge on environmental or health and safety controls in general. So they may be just asking a question, not even recognizing what question they're asking. They may not even understand their own question.
Right.
So, especially when they're going off checklists. So when I come in and do audits for one of the registrars that I work for, and they're the certifying bodies. They're the ones that are giving out your certification. Um, I just sometimes will recommend that they consider other options if their internal audit program is just doesn't have a deep enough bench right now. So a lot of times it's the environmental manager having to do all the environmental audits. Well, you're required to be objective of the process. So if it's all your process, that's a little problematic.
Right.
I mean,
Bias.
and sometimes when you've done all the work yourself, you can't see the forest for the trees. It's really hard to audit your own process because, well,
Right.
right,
Right.
that you did that. Um, so when I come in to do third party audits for the registrar and I start to see a lot of nonconformities, I'm looking first and foremost at the internal audit process. Are we doing a good deep dive when we're doing internal audits, or is it a checklist that really has no meaning, that it's just the same year after year? We're not looking at any changes in the organization. We're not looking at any new regulatory obligations as they apply to us. We may not be looking at shifts in roles and responsibilities. I can list off the top things that are failure points when we have people move seats on the bus, whether it's retirement or they moved into another role. Maybe they've moved from a site management role to a corporate or a regional EHS role. And then there's not as
Robust.
experienced of a person
Yeah. Yeah.
left in that role. So that's when you get into somebody new running ISO system, what you'll find is that the main compliance things that show up on a compliance calendar tend to get done in most cases. It's those things that only happen once a year or once every 3 years, like DOT hazmat training,
Mhm.
are things that get sort of fall off the roadmap. Things like uh knowing some of the more peculiar things about records retention. So, SDS retention for 30 years after we quit using the material. That's a big one that people just they just don't know about it.
Sure.
So, it's really challenging when you've got a new person coming in. They're doing good to keep up with their stuff that has to be done every month, every quarter, that kind of thing.
Now, do you find when you do identify these gaps that management's pretty good or they're willing to identify and correct the situation, but not just correct, like you said, but Right. provide the resources or make sure they do what they can to ensure that that backfilled person is educated or getting the resources they need. Do you find that that's still the case? I know budgetary wise, companies don't always have that, or maybe their upper management saying, "Why do we have to spend our resources on this?" Right? When I can, it's just an ISO audit. It's not non-compliance. Or what do you
Just a
think?
nice Um, I actually have had a number of conversations with plant managers about why do they keep an ISO certification? It's a voluntary certification. They're not mandated to
Right.
have it in most cases. Um, a lot of times, particularly ISO 14001 is mandated in the automotive manufacturing world. So, your big five, automotive manufacturers, they require ISO
Hmm.
14001 for all their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So if they want to keep a bank of business, they have to keep
Have
it.
to do. Sure.
So, and that's part of the reason that the health and safety ISO certification 45001 has not taken off, because there's not a market driver for it at this time. As far as I know, the German car manufacturers, BMW and VW, are starting to require it, but that's the only ones that I'm hearing. So
Mhm.
my companies that are German
Mhm.
seem to be on board with it, and the rest of the world not so much.
See, and that's what's interesting to me because in my mind, I mean, that's your people, right? That's the safety of your workers, your employees. If you're not dealing with, yeah, I get the point about the environmental versus the safety, right? Are we using hazardous chemicals or can we reduce those chemicals, green chemistry, all that? But the safety piece, it's odd to me why that isn't as much, or why isn't it equally treated, right? Why if my employee gets hurt, that's your resource, right? The injuries, all that data related to the OSHA stuff here in the US. Any comments on that?
So the interesting thing is the health and safety standard actually could save a company money. It actually has a financial benefit in most instances.
Right.
Mm. So the 45001 standard has some components to it that are very unique to that standard. They aren't even repeated in the 14001. And the big one is employee engagement. So employees not only get consulted, but must participate in decision making. In the US, we're not really into sharing power that way.
Right.
And this is really was driven more by the European community. In fact, the US almost didn't vote to adopt this standard at all. Partly because we're really a command and control society on the whole. But I like to explain to my clients that are considering it that it is not the equivalent of giving a blank checkbook to a EHS committee. That's not what this is about. This
Right.
is about giving people a voice, and within some parameters, some kind of uh, a fence line, if you will, give them some means of participating and helping to solve problems. And many companies actually do that naturally as part of their company culture. So I recommend to them, especially the ones that really have a lot of discussion opportunities with between their employees and leadership. Things like town hall meetings, pre-shift meetings, just having an active EHS committee that actually does something besides sitting there and saying, yep, that's our latest worker injury stats. And oh, well, that's really not effective. But if you can take that safety committee and give them actual tasks to help you, like assist the safety team in doing incident investigations, especially when you get cross functional feedback. Hey, from a maintenance standpoint, why do you think this happened? From a production standpoint, why did this happen? Maybe from a materials handling perspective, why did this happen? And you may find very different answers on why things occurred, and sometimes multiple causes where we need to have multiple corrective actions to prevent recurrence.
Mhm.
So I think it's actually a really well designed program. It overlaps, it kind of dovetails with the ISO 14001 very nicely. So ISO 14001 has a whole section, 8.2, that's emergency planning. And so what is health and safety? But, looking at emergency. So it is easy to add on 45,000 to an existing 14 or create a integrated system. And I don't know if your listeners know this, but if you have a truly integrated system, your registrar will give you a discount for the number of days that it takes to audit your system. Um, which kind of leads me to something that many companies don't know about. And some registrars are good about sharing this, their sales teams will share this. Others don't get into it, but there is a document called MD5, and it is part of the infrastructure of ISO so far as planning how many audit days you have to have based on the complexity of your environmental and or your health and safety programs. There's also it's got a similar table for quality. So if you've got quality systems, it's the same thing. And the quality one is strictly based on headcount.
Okay.
So that would be your total full-time employee equivalents and including things like people like temporaries and embedded contractors. So if you've got a Granger rep that sits at your facility, that person's going to get included. If you've got two janitors from a service that stay at your facility every day, they're going to get included. So embedded contractors, meaning they go there every day and they work there all day long. So it might
Sure.
be electricians or maintenance or any number of different categories of service companies. So headcount is one thing. And in environmental and health and safety, complexity of your regulatory obligations is another. So, for instance, if I have a company that is a large quantity hazardous waste generator, and maybe they have a remediation project on site, and they have a SPCC program and a Title V air permit. Well, they're going to be in high risk category. Okay. You got a hot lot of very elaborate regulatory programs. Um, if I shift over to their health and safety side, they may be in medium or low complexity. It just depends on the nature of their manufacturing. So maybe their manufacturing's all robotic and
Mhm.
the employees don't have to do a lot of direct work with high risk chemicals or welding or whatever. Maybe it's all automated. So they might be in a lower medium complexity. So when you add up those audit days that the MD5 guidance document gives us, then it tells us how many days we have to have for our initial certification. And then there's a formula we use for annual surveillance visits. And every 3 years, we have a recertification audit. So there's discounts available from those audit days. And this is what's supposed to make a level playing field between all the registrars quoting on somebody's bank of business for certifications.
Okay.
And so we should be seeing a similar calculation from all the different companies. If you quoted the three companies and one of them's quoting you 3 audit days and the other two are quoting you 6 audit days, something's wrong.
Uh-huh.
Make their math, right? Um, so, there's going to be discounts based on complexity. There'll be discounts based on true integration, meaning we need to be able to see the environmental and the health and safety with the same programs, the same documents, the same overall, the same people, the same processes. And in most organizations, they are integrated. So you can get up to a 15 to 25% discount in your audit days for an integrated system. So that's a lovely uh, benefit
Sure.
to your checkbook there.
Yeah.
Um, Other thing you get discounts for are things like multi shifts, or if only a certain group of people deal with your high risk activities. For instance, if my facility is mostly automated, but maintenance is the only ones dealing with high risk activities, then I get a discount applicable to that.
I see.
So, a lot of times people don't know that there is a scientific methodology and mathematical plan here as to how many audit days you have. But this is also kind of a reason to come back to internal audits. It's a reason to do your internal audits using the thought process to be off cycle from when your registrar comes. So a lot of companies think of an internal audit as a pre-registrar audit.
Audit.
That's really not the intent for it. So a more robust method for your internal audits is to have them off cycle. So 6 months off cycle from your surveillance or your recertification audit so that you're keeping your system functioning well, and that it's not just a once a year, oh, we got that done. Phew, we don't have to mess with ISO again for another year. No, you don't want to keep that thought process. You want to keep things where it's in the front of your headlights and that you're keeping focused on it.
Now, do you recommend, like, let's say I'm a brand new company and I'm interested in becoming ISO certified, like what resources to go to? Are there, do I go to the ISO website, or what do you recommend as far as when I'm doing the initial research, what's right for me audit wise or certification wise? What are my steps?
Well, the first step is to know where you stand from a compliance standpoint. So I always like to tell people that the minimum expectation for ISO is legal. We're
Mhm.
meeting our legal obligations. I kind of liken that, we look at our grade school, our capabilities. When you get to first grade, you start to learn your letters, and third grade, your reading and so forth. I say it's third grade, right? Is legal. Um, and your program should support legal, right? Might not have a lot of deep bench yet. You might not have created a lot of distance between your legal and where you want to operate. So ideally, as your system gets more robust, you're going to operate more at 12th grade, maybe college level, and over at the end of the day, we're maybe PhD level performance, which is going to create a very high performance level versus the regulatory requirements way down at the bottom here. So that if we drop the ball on something, we're not likely to be out of compliance on anything because we have so much room between our regulatory obligations and where we're actually functioning. Okay,
Right.
so that's one thing is to know the status of your compliance programs. Where are you meeting the obligations? Where are they weak? Where do you not even know they exist and need to be put in place? So a good compliance audit is a key there. So compliance audits are not all made the same. Whoever you talk to get quotes on compliance audits, get some examples, maybe even ask for a kind of an example report that would give an overview of what kinds of information they're going to provide for you. When I'm doing compliance audits, I give basically a report on the five major media. So we'll look at things like air, waste, water, and so forth. So I provide my clients with a list of compliance obligations, citing back to the federal and the state, and where it's applicable, a local ordinance. So they're, 40 CFR, whatever it is, for that, as to what's applicable to them, or to list why it's not currently applicable to them, and helps them to identify, oh, well, currently we're not subject to something like the refrigeration rule. Okay. We don't have anything that is at our 50 pounds of the class one, class two refrigerants. Okay, great. What happens if we suddenly get a used piece of equipment that has that refrigerant in it? Well, looking at that compliance list, that's going to help me to say, oh, wait, wonder about that new chiller we just bought, which was used and comes in with 100 pounds of refrigerant. I might have that as applicability now. So this is a great tool for management of change, but it also helps you to know what programs do we not have that we need, or that need to be updated, or maybe tossed in the trash and started over. Okay.
Sure.
So getting kind of a scorecard on your compliance obligations is first. Second is shop around for registrars. They are not all created equal. So there are some that are quite large. BSI is probably the largest in the world right now. I did work for them for 10 years. They're a very good
Mhm.
organization. They are large. So you know what that comes with is a little bit of red tape, and sometimes um, challenges in communication, but they are a very good organization. So I can't say anything bad about them. Um, there are some smaller regional registrars. Currently, I'm working for Eagle Registrations out of Dayton, Ohio. And so I contract out my services to them, 8 or 10 audits a year. So I just like to keep my toe into what the registrars are doing. And Eagle doesn't pay me to promote them, other than, I like them, and that's the reason I work with them. They're very good communicators, and uh, they're straight shooters. And I have to say, I appreciate that. As a business owner, and somebody who's owned 13 companies over my 40 years of adult working life, I appreciate people who kind of tell you what you're going to be paying for, and why it's appropriate upfront. So they have a very good sales team. I work with their sales rep, Allison McGee, who's outstanding. She's just a really, really good person to help people come on board with knowing what you're signing up for when you look for a certifying body. And really, ideally, whoever you work with, you want to work with somebody who is presenting themselves as a partner to your organization, because they are. They're sharing your business information. They're going to be knowing some confidential information about your company. They're going to know if there's a notice of violation. They're going to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. So you want to work with somebody you trust. Eagle happens to contract out all of their auditors. BSI has a mix of full-time and contract auditors, and each registrar I've been experienced with, SRI, SGS, there's just a bunch of them out there. And some of them use all full-time auditors, and some use contract
Okay.
or a mix. So that's something to know about. Some of your registrars will give you resumes for the auditors and allow you to help select them for you. Um, that isn't always terribly practical, because one of the things that we in the audit world are challenged with is our travel schedules. And so, I'm in the Midwest in Indiana, and I don't want to go to California for a 2-day audit. It
Mm.
takes me 2 days to travel that. So it's not effective for me. They may want
Sure.
me, but they're not getting me, because I'm
Sure.
not traveling that far for a 2-day audit. I
Right.
might consider it for a 5-day audit, but most of the time I have plenty of business right here in the Midwest or the Southeast, where I generally work, and I don't need to travel out to California and Washington State and so forth. Might be very interesting. but I don't do it very often because I don't need to and don't particularly want to.
Sure. It makes sense. Makes sense. Now, do you, as an auditor, have to maintain any certifications and maintenance points, kind of like what we do at HMP or certification?
Well, actually, yes. So my CHMM does count towards my 14,001 and my 45,001 certification. And you may not even know this a ton, but back when the 14,001 standard was first introduced in the mid 90s, um, ANAB, which is our, I call it the keeper of the keepers. So they're the accreditation body
Accreditation.
over the certification bodies. So they didn't
Okay.
have enough auditors that were qualified to do audits for registrars for the 14,001 standard because, well, prior to that standard being issued, quality was the big one and nobody did anything else. Now there's all kinds of standards, but they needed a way to seed their auditor population. So what they did was they worked with IHMM, the Institute of Hazardous Materials Managers, and they got the list of CHMMs. So for those listeners who don't know, Atanu and I are both certified hazardous materials managers and know each other through that organization. My dad was also a CHMM.
Oh,
And
wow.
so Ken James and my mentor, Evelyn Crooks, were both CHMMs, and they are peer level. They don't like me saying how close they are in age, but they're close enough. And they're both retired. But my dad and Evelyn actually were CHMMs and then took their CHMM and my dad's network of manufacturing companies that he'd worked with over the years, and he offered free audits because all they had to do was show, I think they had to do 3 audits and show their reports to ANAB, and then they would get vetted out as auditors for 14,001. And so my
Wow.
dad and Evelyn did that in 1996.
Wow.
So, so that was
Fantastic. Oh my gosh.
go. Um, but so yes, my CHMM is certainly one of the things I use. The time I teach, so I teach a lot for AHMP. I teach for my clients. I track my teaching time. So I'm sure and many of your listeners know that there's nothing like teaching to keep you sharp because your students are going to test your knowledge and you're going to have to stay on your game. Okay. So the other thing that I do is I hold certifications with Exemplar Global. So that is a an organization that makes sure that I stay up with my CEUs every year. So like when we went to the EHS Hazmat Summit, I collect my CEUs from that as well as all my CEUs for all my other classes I take. Um, and I submit those. I think I have to do it every 3 years. I have to submit it, and then they want their pound of flesh. They want to take my money, and, the nice thing, though, with Exemplar, there's actually, IRCA is another organization that does a similar thing, and they're based out of England. But Exemplar is really nice because they offer online education for their auditors, and it's very specific to audit processes, like using AI in audits or
Okay.
using remote audit processes. We had to do a lot of that in COVID. So that was really nice that they included that as part of their fee.
Okay. Wow, that's quite extensive. I mean, but I'm glad to hear that your work as in the AHMP world is actually helping you in your day job. So that's fantastic. It's always good when you can maintain your accreditation through what you do on a day-to-day basis because I know not everyone can do that. I'm in that certification world myself, trying to make sure people have the right CMPs towards maintaining what they're doing. So, for the listeners out there, whatever you're doing, make sure you're tracking that. So, for your accreditation,
If you didn't document it, it didn't
it
happen.
didn't
That's my
happen.
motto. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Jen, this has been a great conversation. I'd love you to leave us with some parting thoughts on this, and we'd love to have you back for some future episodes. What would you like to impart some thoughts for our listeners?
So one of the things that I talk to my clients about, and they probably are sick of me saying it, but a risk you don't admit exists is a risk you can't control. And so one of my jobs as an auditor is to help you admit you have a risk. And I have to sell it. Sometimes I have to kind of let people know this is not just something I'm making up. These are things that really will hurt you, whether it's from a regulatory standpoint, bad publicity standpoint, a financial standpoint, an actual hurting the environment, or sometimes hurting employees. A lot of times I'll run into what I call an out of scope observation, a health and safety issue I observed during an environmental audit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that person almost ran over this other person with a forklift. Yeah, this is not okay. That happens a lot,
Mm,
So I try to help my clients identify risk and really believe they're for real and do something about them. So, if you don't really focus on a risk, it's hard to put any energy and resources around resolving it. And so I try to collect all of my horror stories and tell them ad nauseum because I hope it communicates to companies what's going to happen if you continue ignoring this.
right. Well, great. That's an excellent word of advice in any aspect of EHS, risk management, and not knowing what there is to know and not fully understanding very critical, important points. Well, Jen, thanks again. For those of you listening today, you can visit the website, hackyourhascom.com, to learn more and contact Jen. I'm sure she'd be happy to help you with implementing these excellent audit features that we talked about today, probably some additional resources we could provide as well. So thanks again, Jen, for your time. And it was a great pleasure speaking to you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.